Alright, so in this, I guess, unintentional follow-up to the Dreamcatcher video, I really didn't think about that when we were planning these. But yeah, we're going to continue to talk about sort of slithery monsters that are trying to get inside your body and take over your body as well. With these two, Night of the Creeps and Slither, and I don't know if you noticed the title of the video, but I kind of wanted to try something different that's actually not different at all. At least it wasn't for several years. Where this is basically us doing the versus thing that we've been doing, and it was only, despite doing this since 2013, it was only kind of a couple of years, the past couple of years, I feel like finally got a hold on the whole versus angle and being able to go back and forth. For most of the time we did this, for like 10 years, I basically just talked about one movie, and then I talked about the other movie with not a lot of comparison, just two movies that I kind of thought went together. And I've been expressing regret in the last year or two that I hadn't been calling the series Double Feature this whole time, which would have been much more appropriate for like those first 10 years that we did this. So I kind of wanted to take that approach for most of these. Like maybe one or two we do within this month will be like a versus where we go back and forth and actually compare. But this is a case where I kind of just want to talk about the movies with comparing and like choosing one over the other, not really being at the forefront. And just focusing on one and then focusing on the other. Yeah. So, and you know, the idea that that whole style of the double feature just kind of goes with horror, like the fact that the term B movie comes from double features, referring to the second movie in one. So I feel like this makes just as much sense as the versus thing, and is I guess is kind of easier to do. And it's like I just kind of want to talk about the movies anyway, but people get really, when they see the verses, they get really hung up on, well, you need to compare them explicitly and you need to pick one. And it's like, fuck you. So, so I want to actually promise what I'm actually going to give you and just refer to it as double feature. And this is how I want to start that. So, I want to talk about Night of the Creeps first, which is by Fred Decker, who seemed like he was going to be this. I mean, he's definitely a horror icon, despite only really having two movies that fit that criteria, which is he did this, and then the next year he immediately followed it up with the Monster Squad. Then, like, several years went by, he did RoboCop 3, and then he stopped directing movies. Like, there was, like, some writing credits here and there as well. But when you think about the fact that the same guy wrote and directed this and the Monster Squad back-to-back, it makes you think he might have had some sort of very, very entertaining horror career, but these two were really, this and the Monster Squad, were about it as far as that was concerned. But at the same time, both of those movies have a legacy for a reason, and Night of the Creeps especially does something so fun, and it might seem like unique is the wrong word, because there's so many homages and callbacks and stuff like that, but it kind of really does feel like it has its own vibe, which is really impressive given how, you know, homage-based it is. Because when we start off, it starts off in a very interesting way that makes you think it's going to be a totally different movie than it actually is. Where we start off on this alien spaceship, and we actually see these little aliens running around with, like, you know, like weapons, and there's like this experimental vial or tube that one of them is running around with that's going to set off the plot of this movie that they lose. And it just kind of drops out of the sky like typically, you know, a meteor would or like E.T. would or something. And it's going to be what causes the chaos here. And they just sort of fly away, and we never see them or their ship again unless you're watching this director's cut. In which case you see the ship fly over one more time, and that's it. You never see those. So you think it's going to be like almost a Critters type movie or something. And while and that's not necessarily to say that there's not some sort of Critters vibe in this a little bit, it's certainly not what you think it's going to be by the opening scene. So, what's interesting now is we go from this, you know, campy alien type setup into a black and white segment set in 1959 that has more of a... Now, when you think, a 1950s black and white movie, you think something, sci-fi, like something that's sort of alien-like. But at this particular time, it takes on more of an almost slasher vibe, where on the radio we hear about an axe murderer that's escaped from an asylum and is running around while everybody, like these college kids, are out making out and stuff like that. I think I read somewhere that Decker initially wanted the whole movie to be black and white, if I'm not mistaken, in which case it kind of would have had this sort of more gruesome, like, body snatchers kind of feel, like Don Siegel's Body Snatchers. Um, and so, it's like, just so many vibes are coming into this from different directions. And so once we get that set up where it feels like a slasher movie in the 50s, then we jump again to 1986, which would have been present day when this came out. And then for a while, it's just like a college movie, like a college comedy, where it's like, there's stuff involving fraternity hazing. There's the medical student that's young David Paymer. There's like pranks going on, and there's, our main character having a crush on a girl that he's too afraid to talk to, and he's got his funny best friend alongside him. Cynthia Cronenberg is the name of the love interest. You'll notice that all of the characters have like last names of famous horror directors and stuff like that. I feel like Cronenberg especially fits because it seems like there was a lot of Shivers inspiration from this, so I feel like that one especially was specifically deliberate. But you have, like I said, basically this college comedy going on about this guy with a crush, this guy that's played by Jason Lively, who you probably mostly recognize as he was the Rusty Griswold in European Vacation. And when you see him in European Vacation or this, or whatever it is, he has this ability to be effortlessly funny. Like kind of when I was a kid, when I was growing up, he was like kind of my least favorite Rusty, like the one that didn't leave an impression. But as I've gotten older, his performance in European Vacation especially gets so much funnier. I don't know why age is making it funnier, but that's just the way it is. And here, even playing the straight man role, he's still effortlessly funny, whether it be like line deliveries, or there's that one like silent slapstick moment we see from kind of a distance, where JC, his best friend, is kind of talking him up to Cynthia, I think, and he turns and he smashes his drink into the guy standing next to him. And it's just this really quick cut, and it's like just moments like that, too. Where I love that you can have a straight man lead character that's also quite funny when he needs to be. And he does that really well here. And then we get another completely out of left field introduction with the Tom Atkins character, who we may or may not realize right away that we have met before, where when it's his introduction is this dream sequence where he's on a beach, and then he flashes back to the moment where the girl he was in love with in the 50s was killed by that axe murderer in the opening scene. And at the time, we didn't realize that he was the cop that had stopped by. So we give him this tragic backstory that also has this really surreal moment where he has this dream where he starts on a beach and he's in like full uniform, and then he's back to that time in the 50s only as his older self, and when the killer turns around it's like a skeleton zombie. And it's like it's just so many wild vibes, like I said, coming from all different directions with how things are introduced into this movie. But before we get into the craziness of it all, what I think is really impressive about this movie is while it's also juggling all of these tones and all of these, references to other things while also being its own horror movie. A place where it kind of differs is there's a lot of characters in this one that you actually kind of care about. And it's weird to say that so flippantly, because like in like a drama or something, it's like everything's on the line as to whether you care about the characters or not. And in horror, it's usually not something that's as paid attention to, because it's like, oh, as long as we have the gore, or as long as we have the thrills, or whatever it is, as long as it's fun, then, that's the experience. But the fact that we actually have, a lead character that's funny, but also kind of, relatably awkward, and he's got his best friend, who, despite being, I just described him as, like, the comedy best friend sidekick, he's also like a real friend. We have this scene where he's just had like this horrible run-in with Cynthia and embarrassed himself, and when they come back to the dorm, he's like being mopey, and JC just like goes off on him and is as real with him as he could possibly be about why he's single, because he acts the way that he does. And it's like maybe one of the most real best friend moments in like a movie, at least from this era, and certainly in this type of movie. And to the point that he becomes a tragic character, where there's the moment where he's killed in the bathroom, which would typically just be another body count moment in another movie, but we have this moment afterwards where he's left a tape for Lively's character, and he's explaining what happened, and it's like, you can kill them with fire, and then he explains what's happening to him, where he's like, I think they're in my brain, I think I'm dead. And it's really eerie and creepy the way he's describing this, and there's like a change in his voice to where he doesn't even sound like himself. But because we've become accustomed to the character being likable and being real and being a really good friend, this creepy and eerie moment is also really sad and tragic. And the way Lively plays it just on his face, just with the expression of listening to this. Because you think it might be a moment where he's like, oh, he's left me a prank or something. But with everything that's happened up to this point, you can see it setting in, where Lively's character realizes this is real, and he's taking all the information in of, oh, like, my best friend is dead, but also fire kills them. This is, I need to prioritize what I'm being told right now. And it's like, it's actually quite complicated what the character's going through emotionally in this moment. And the moment after that where he, like, finds his body, that's really real emotion and character work for this movie that's otherwise prided on how much of a kind of a B movie it is at the end of the day, or like what it's the throwback to B movies that it is. But we talk about the main characters. There's also characters that don't need to be as likable as they are. Like, they could just be throwaway characters, but they're written so cleverly, like Steve. Steve, who I feel like we only see once. Maybe he's in, like, the Horde towards the end or the middle or whatever, but this guy Steve, who is, like, this sort of... He looks like he's going to be, like, an ape-like bully character, and he's got, like, the one eyebrow all the way across. And our lead characters, the characters who could be seen as, like, dorky outcasts, are making fun of him, because he looks like this certain type of character. So, when JC goes over to shoo him away so he can talk to the girl, he tells Steve, you have a phone call. And when he tells him this, Steve gets, like, Steve is, like, genuinely happy somebody's calling him. He's like, whoa, thanks, dude! And he walks away. And Cliché will tell us that when Steve comes back and realizes there was no phone call for him, it's gonna turn into, I'm about to beat the shit out of you, or something like that. And all Steve says is, I don't think you're very funny. And it's like, we feel bad. First, Steve did not deserve that. Steve is not the guy we thought he was from a distance. And it's like, to have so much thought put into this, like, one-off character that you think is one type, but is actually not really that guy. I mean, he's kind of that guy, but not really. So, I mean, let's hear it for Steve. I mean, that's my takeaway from that. So, those are just details that are really nice to just throw in. And it gives the movie this sort, like I said, this unique vibe where it's like, you think you know what you're getting, and you're pretty much getting what you think you are, but there are these things that also throw you off completely, whether it be the way Atkins is introduced in that surreal scene, or a character like Steve being here. So, there's all that character-wise. Then we get into the really crazy shit, when it does turn into, like, this zombie movie of sorts, or this invasion movie of sorts. Where we get stuff, like, there's grounded things like that, then there's stuff like the zombie cat and the zombie dog, and the different approaches they take to how some of these look. Like, some of them just look like, Walking Dead bodies. Some of there's, like, the one with, like, the skinned face, where it's like, sometimes, when it's not completely gory. So when there's, like, one moment here or there that's kind of especially gory, it kind of catches you off guard. And for a movie that's juggling so many tones, like when it catches you off guard, it can really catch you off guard, which is really fun. Because then, like right after that, something comedic will happen. But then we get stuff like when we bring back the sort of things that over the top scenes that happen that stem from some of those real character moments, like how we build up that Atkins' character has this tragic backstory where the girl he loved was killed by this axe murderer, and then we get the backstory where after he killed the murderer, he buried his body under the house. So we get the moment where these alien creatures are starting to resurrect corpses, and one of the corpses resurrected is this axe murderer who is now bursting out of the floor of the person who lives here now. And these moments just feel so wonderfully over the top and insane. For like it feels like it's a typical zombie movie, but it's always taking like a slight step further, or a slightly sort of, like I was saying, like the thing I can't stress enough. We think we know what we're getting, and we are getting it, but just a little more. So moments like that, and then this whole climax with the shotgun flamethrower combo that they figure out. There's even a lawnmower moment pre-Dead Alive. And so all of this just turns it into this, like the entire second half, where it goes full, like, action, kill them all with fire and shotguns, is so fun and crazy, and everything that you would want a movie like this to be. Stuff that would later be recaptured by, like when Rodriguez did Planet Terror, stuff like that. Only, like, in an 80s sort of era, where it was, like, in the place it belonged and wasn't like it starts off as something that's trying to be from another era and then just sort of becomes its own great thing. And even throwing in like a Dick Miller cameo, who is like the king of B movies, who did like all the stuff with Corman. I think he's in just about every single Joe Dante movie. So like anytime you see him in a movie, it feels like this season, and I just love that feeling. So just, like, it's like Decker knew. Just seeing Dick Miller's face for a second is going to make a horror fan, and a low-budget horror fan, which this movie is always lovingly coming back to, is going to bring that to you. Just these small details, and Decker knew, like, all the beats to hit, the big and the small, to hit horror fans, like, right in their hearts, and know exactly what they wanted. And it's basically just a whole movie of that feeling, which is fantastic. We even have, like Decker was talking about wanting to hit, like, every single cliche intentionally. So we get moments like Atkins' character having his own sort of catchphrases, where the thrill me thing comes up a lot. And it's one of those things that would be cheesy, and it'd be like, oh, this movie's really trying to have a catchphrase. But when you know what Decker's doing, and when he casts an actor like Atkins, who is so notoriously straight-faced and no bullshit, is the one that's delivering this, it's perfect. There's the point in time where he says it's Miller time for seemingly no reason. And it's... there might have been a beer used in there, I don't remember, but yeah, the idea of when you know what he was going for, it all feels perfect. So what I also love about this movie is I feel like if this was a movie that was made today, it would be very apparent that somebody was trying to make a cult movie. Like when you look at like the Sharknado shit or the Zombievers shit or whatever else there is, it's usually sharks of some kind. It's always people trying to do something when obviously the real cult movies happen by accident. And I believe Decker has talked about that too, where it's like he was just wanting to make like this sort of throwback. Like it wasn't really meant or made to be like some sort of cult movie. It was just like, oh, I love this stuff. I know horror fans love this stuff. Let's see what we can do when we mesh a lot of things together. And it made this really great thing, and it doesn't feel like it's trying really hard to be something. Like I said, apart from, being a throwback and having some callbacks to the past, it's not like it's trying to make those things its entire identity, which is what that stuff does now, and you can tell that they're trying to do that. And this movie just very organically became beloved in the circles that are lucky enough to know that it exists. And so that and it could have been like trying to do too much, but it's almost shockingly well balanced in taking all these things. Even being just a college movie of its time, like an '80s college movie, that's not even out of its decade. It's right there in that college '80s college movie era, and it's that stuff is in there too. So it was its own present day and the past stuff all coming together. And you have the whole two endings thing, where I talked about that earlier, where it's like in the director's cut we have the moment when the aliens are going into the cemetery, and then we see the ship and they're looking for the stuff. I don't know if maybe they thought that ending was going to be too confusing or something, but the other ending where it's just the dog, like it comes out of the dog and it goes towards Cynthia, I think, and that was the original ending, which seems pretty I don't know, obvious and anticlimactic, I guess. But I don't really think the endings are different enough that I'm curious when they did the theatrical release, why they thought they needed another ending. But like I said, the only thing I can think of is maybe the ship thing was too confusing. But you'd also think people would want to see the ship again to give the opening scene more of a did I imagine that happened? Like, kind of take away that feeling a little bit. But whatever. I think that the ending with them going to the cemetery is perfectly fun. I can see why that's the one that Decker originally planned. And we get that last shot of Atkins like coming out all charred, and then they break out of him, which is this cool moment. So that's yeah. So at the end of the day, yeah, it's trying to do a lot of things, but it's kind of succeeding in all of them, and seemingly accidentally made itself a stone cold classic, at least among horror fans. Like I said, the people that know it exists. So, I mean, obviously its reputation is growing more the more horror fan bases seem to grow, which is just a beautiful thing. So, I really, really love this movie. So I just needed to talk about it and gush about it. So, yeah, I think it's pretty easy to pair it up with Slither if you were going to continue this sort of, like I said, slithering monsters that come out of the sky and will take over your body, and it kind of turns into a zombie-like thing. Now, of course, this is James Gunn, an early James Gunn, so it's going to be significantly gorier. That's going to kind of be the star of the show, is how wicked and gruesome and disgusting it can get in a way a horror fan loves. So, like that's what you're paying for. So, they do make a comedic moment out of the meteor dropping, which is, this moment we see in stuff like The Blob or Killer Clowns and stuff like that. But the way we're cutting back and forth between the bored cops, Nathan Fillion and his partner, and it's already, you can get the vibe that it's that thing where it's going to do the thing that it's, the throwback, we can see all the influences that came before it. But he's going to be doing it in a much more sort of comedic way that doesn't quite reach parody. I almost feel like it's almost too loving of the things that it's borrowing from to be considered parody. So it's another thing like Night of the Creeps, where it is kind of its own thing, but a lot of that comes from where, like, Night of the Creeps is just like a really great math problem, where it's like, this thing plus this thing plus this thing shockingly equals this thing that works. And it's like this, it was more like it comes together through being so clearly Gunn's voice and vision. And just his style, his dark humor, and his, just in general, the gore aspect and how it's used, where you can really see the trauma roots in him here. So, complete with a Lloyd Kaufman cameo there at the police station. And one of the characters is watching the Toxic... I can't remember which character it is now. One of the characters is watching the Toxic Avenger. I think it's the woman that Rooker's about to cheat with, before we get the body horror reveal. But yeah, before we get all that stuff, we do get the introduction of this town. And that's another thing that was kind of a staple of these sort of early monster movies, which was just the small town atmosphere and the community atmosphere. And this one sets it up, and once again, it's like, it's the thing, but it's also got this edge to it now, this James Gunn edge to it, and this 2006 edge to it, where we meet the mayor, and the mayor's not a good guy, and typically in these older movies, the mayor would be like, oh, he's kind of, selfish, or he's kind of looking out for himself, and that's how he's going to use his elected position. Here, he's like blaring his horn in the middle of the street and screaming profanity, and it's like that's how we establish right away. This guy's kind of a piece of shit. And then you've got like you've got I was talking about how this community is so small and so free of trouble that the cops are just bored. The cops just sort of sit around at night and wait for something to happen, and typically nothing will until now. But even when you get characters like Nathan Fillion's obviously like our main character and one of our main characters, just details like the karaoke woman, or just things that like really set up the community in this way, and setting up the characters like Michael Rooker and Elizabeth Banks, and getting their whole backstory of how that marriage came to be, and the fact that she's also this long lost love interest of Fillion, and how all that ties in. Because there's something. What's great about the casting of Fillion here, especially in this part, is he does kind of have that sort of old school quality where it's like, if you were to look back at a movie from like the 50s, where it's like a monster movie, and you have the guy that's like, the cop, and he's the one that he's like he becomes the action hero, but he's also got the long lost love interest he's reuniting with. Whichever actor that would have been in the 50s, Nathan Fillion probably has vibes of whoever that would be. Where it's like, I feel like Nathan Fillion's one of those actors you can put in just about any era, and he would fit in. And he can also play just about any kind of role, whether it be, like the action hero, or, he could be like just as believably the dumbest guy in the room as he is the smartest guy in the room. And in comedy. And so this is a character that's kind of the action hero, but there's also a lot of comedic moments that he has here, and like in his line deliveries in particular, like when he's talking to his partner Wally, he has this delivery at the beginning where he says like, "Oh, that reminds me, fuck you, fat ass," and it's like I can't even recreate his delivery. It's so good and so specific. And then, like I said, you've got the Rooker character and the Banks character, and what's interesting about the Rooker character is it feels like we set up in the entire first third or so like he seems like he's the main character. It's also quite funny that his character's name is Grant. It's his first and last name. And the way he plays this part, where it's like he's kind of, you can see how distant their marriage is, and it almost seems like that's like an early conflict, a conflict that you'd have with like the main character. So of course Banks does eventually become one of the main characters, but like I said, there's so much focus on him for a long time. It feels like this interesting sort of curveball that he becomes essentially the main monster of the movie. And the entire first third is us watching this transformation happen before we start to focus on the other characters sort of the rest of the way. And so you get moments like when he goes to the store for meat, and we realize that he's starting to eat raw meat, and so it's one of those things it feels so creepy and unnatural in this effective way, but then they also make it comedic. Okay, when he's at the store and he's like, get me 8, no 10, no 14, and then we cut to him with just a truck full. In moments like that where they can take the creepy and eerie stuff and the unnatural stuff and throw this dark comedy into it. It's basically what Gunn was known for a very long time. And then of course we have the body horror of it, where we have this great reveal of him when he pulls his shirt open, and there's this countdown going on. And it's like the way the editing cuts back and forth with that is really well done. And then once he opens his shirt, the movie becomes basically what we've been waiting for in a really big way, and never lets up. If anything, this movie's practice of escalation as it goes on is one of its big strengths. And so, like I said, the Gunn trauma roots really start to take over. And what I like about that also is the way we build up his character, where we start to see the body horror aspect of it, and then when we see him, like when he's really reached it's not his final monster form, but it's when he's like in a monster form for the first time, and we kind of see him from a distance. So there's like just enough time in there to kind of build up to what he's going to look like up close and personal before he finally gets to us. We have the line where one of the older characters says, he looks like something that fell off my dick in the war. is a good line. And vivid. But yeah, and then we get these effects where it's like you can tell there's a lot of practical stuff. Like I said, there's trauma roots, but then there's also some stuff that's maybe like this was Gunn getting the chance to go bigger than he had yet. So there's going to be some enhanced effects also. So we get stuff like when the guy like splits open, which is really wild and gnarly. And then, like I said, it basically just escalates from there, and we get crazy shit like, the zombie deer, or, what's her name, Brenda, that, like, blows up like a balloon. And we get this really sort of twisted scene, and it's like, and it's such an... How these characters transform is so unexpected from character to character. So it's like we've seen what's happened to Rooker, and so we kind of suspect, oh, if we see Brenda, it's going to be something else, and then it's this, and they even throw in those comedic moments with that also, where like now that has shocked us and grossed us out, we get deliveries like, so what's going on here? It's how this is introduced. And when she's like, I believe one of the characters says like, "Will somebody get her to stop that shit?" Uh, it's like the reactions also almost feel kind of real and grounded to the extremely outlandish things we're seeing, which is fantastic. And then we get moments as it continues to spread, and they start to descend on this family. And at this point, it's almost like it always gives me arachnophobia vibes. When we get to this moment where they kind of descend on this family and they're kind of creeping around, and we're just kind of waiting for all hell to break loose with this one family. And only one of which manages to survive enough to become part of the survivor group here. And then, yeah, we get a lot... You can see a lot of the influences, like, we mentioned Body Snatchers and The Blob, and we mentioned Shivers with Night of the Creeps, all that stuff that we've mentioned between this and the Dreamcatcher video. You can see a ton of inspiration in it. And when we get to the very end, when Grant's like in his sort of full form, and much of the town is here as well, and it has this sort of... I suppose you could say, it's Lovecraftian. The first thing that jumps in my head is Society. Is the movie Society. So, and the idea that there's like this sort of hive mind when they take over, like it's all sort of Grant or the creature, kind of coming out of all of them. It's sort of like, it predates how Gunn handled Starro in the Suicide Squad in this really interesting way. So it's like, you can see the influences that came before him, and then you can see what he took from this movie and carried forward in his future career as well. Now being like, one of the most powerful people in the movie industry, probably, at this point. So with the whole Marvel and DC connection now. So, yeah. The thing about Slither, though, is that when it first came out, I think I was much more enthralled with it than I am now. And I think maybe that's because I've seen many more of the movies now that he took inspiration from, that it feels a little... And it's like I said, like there's a lot of influences that were put into Night of the Creeps, but I feel like, and this is the part where it's like, oh, I guess it's going to be a versus anyway if I'm choosing one over the other, but I did just want to point out that it's a testament to Night of the Creeps that I still feel like it became its own thing in this way that doesn't really make me think a lot about the movies that came before and after it. When I'm watching Night of the Creeps, I'm usually focused on Night of the Creeps. When I watch Slither, I am thinking about a lot of other movies that I can see in it. So it's like, but this was also Gunn kind of finding his footing a little bit, because while he'd been in the movie industry for quite some time at this point in various ways, this felt like it was sort of him really getting like free reign on something of this magnitude. And it seems small, but when you think about where he came from, this was something of like quite a bit more magnitude at the time and something more mainstream. And so when you see him kind of finding his footing there, it's still great to look back on this and see what his career's become and how big he is now. Sort of like when you look at, Peter Jackson and you go back to his era of like Dead Alive and, Bad Taste and Meet the Feebles and stuff like that. Not that anybody should want to remember Meet the Feebles, but that's there. So, yeah, but that's how I feel about these. I still like Slither just fine, not as much as I did when it first came out, when I wasn't as well-versed in the genre and where the influences came from, but I still love it quite a bit. But Night of the Creeps is just yes, all around. So I guess I'm gonna leave this. Like I said, I'm shooting all of these completely out of order. So whatever the next thing is whatever the next thing is. But it's gonna be, more of the Stephen King stuff. There's gonna be more of these and a lot more of the straight to video stuff we've been doing. And maybe a couple of other things here and there. So until the next thing, I think that's it.